Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. I promised a while ago that I was going to get back into these positional rankings for fantasy, so that's what we're doing now that the last Film Room episode is done and complete and released. You can go check that out, of course, but now that that's all done, I can get back into this fantasy stuff. So let's get into these quarterbacks. These are actually slightly updated rankings from my initial rankings. If you've been on my Patreon at all and you've seen the exclusive patron-only PPR rankings, you'll probably notice these are a little bit different. Not a lot of changes, but a little bit of changes just to kind of account for the first couple weeks of training camp. So I'll be releasing a full update for every single position after the first few preseason games, or after the first week of preseason games. So I've got pretty substantial changes with running backs and receivers and minor changes with quarterback and tight ends. So all that's going to be coming out after those games are done, just in case there's injuries and all that kind of stuff. But for now, let's talk about these quarterbacks. Let's get into that. And the earliest I have any quarterbacks going is round 4, which is pretty standard. Some people like Aaron Rodgers as a third-round pick. I've got him in round 4. I've had him as a fourth-round pick, it seems like, for like 5 years now. And he's been the QB1 for like 5 years now, because how can you not? It's Aaron Rodgers. There's really not a whole lot to say about it, like whether there's turnover in the receiving core, turnover in the offensive line. I know people are a little bit worried about the David Bakhtiari injury, which I can understand that. People are wondering what's it going to look like now that Jordy's gone, but he's still got Devontae Adams. They have a whole bunch of young receivers they really like. Jimmy Graham was brought in to help out in the red zone. They've got a couple running backs there that I like in the receiving game. So overall, like, I'm not worried about the situation whatsoever. And it's still Aaron Rodgers. He's still a Hall of Fame caliber quarterback, one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. So I'm really not sweating it. And then right behind him, I have Deshaun Watson, who, just looking at different fantasy sites and on Reddit and, you know, all the different fantasy communities, it seems like everybody either loves Deshaun Watson or hates him. I'm a lover of Deshaun Watson. It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a Texans fan. I mean, it's great that he plays for my team, but just like on the field, it's hard to not think of him as a fantasy monster. And I personally, again, this has nothing to do with him playing for the team that I happen to root for. I have never seen a young quarterback develop so fast in my entire life. I've never seen somebody go from really, really inconsistent in the preseason and shaky and kind of justifying my pre-draft grade on him. And then, you know, he had his first start against Cincy after playing a half against Jacksonville, and it was like, okay, he's making some bad decisions and he looks a little shaky, but there's still a lot of playmaking elements there. And then he went to Foxborough in week 3 and lit it up. He went toe-to-toe with Tom Brady, no fear, no anything. Just, he looked like the not the Dak Prescott. He looked like the Deshaun Watson that we saw against Alabama in those 2 back-to-back championship games. And it's like, okay, this dude's ready for the big moment. And he played extremely well in that game and just never stopped playing well. He looked better every single week. And I know people say, oh, it's garbage time stats and all that kind of stuff. Like, he had maybe 2 garbage time touchdowns against the Chiefs, and that's it. So like, I can't really say that he had a whole bunch, he was a garbage time king, like we're talking about Blake Bortles here. Like, that, it was minimal garbage time production and a whole lot of just absolute dominance on the field. And yeah, there's still some balls that he wished he could take back. There's some throws that he really shouldn't have made that led to some pretty bad interceptions. But, you know, on the whole, just looking at his chemistry with his receivers, looking at how he used his mobility to compensate for having a really terrible offensive line, I mean, everything on tape was spectacular. And I think just looking at his rate of development, because it's so much faster than literally every other young quarterback I've seen, except for maybe Carson Wentz. That jump from year 1 to year 2 is insane. But, you know, just looking at his rate of development, there's no reason for me to think that he can't be one of the best quarterbacks in the league, or at the very least one of the most productive quarterbacks in the league from a fantasy standpoint, just because he has everything you want. He has the receiving core, he has the arm, he has the mobility, he has the intellect, he has a good coaching staff that's going to actually put him in a good position to make plays. Like, overall, like, I don't see any downside here. I think, barring injury, which, you know, it's always possible, but you don't want to predict injuries because you can't predict injuries. You know, barring injury to either himself or like a major weapon like DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to be a monster, an absolute monster. I have zero reason to doubt that. And you can say I'm a homer and that, oh, I'm a Texans fan just talking about my guy, but I would say the same thing no matter what team he was on. Like, the kid's for real. He's absolutely for real. So let's move on to somebody who made a similar kind of jump. Again, one of the one of the quickest developing quarterbacks, young quarterbacks that I've seen in terms of a year 1 to a year 2 jump, and that's Carson Wentz. And, people are either like really high or really low on him, seemingly just based on his knee injury, whether they think he's going to come back from it. I personally am not worried about it. I think ACLs are not as big of a deal as they used to be, especially for the quarterback position. It's not like his game is based on cutting in the open field and, making plays with his legs. That is an element of it, yes, but it's not entirely based around that. He can be a statue and still win from the pocket because he's really smart. He's got a great arm. He's got great touch, very accurate downfield. Like, he can play a classic pocket quarterback game. He doesn't have to run around everywhere. So the ACL isn't super concerning for me. Will he maybe start a little bit slow in the year as he comes back? Possibly, but I don't really think he will. I think he'll be just fine. So again, Carson Wentz, he has that Aaron Rodgers type upside because if I was going to compare him to anybody on tape, it probably would be Aaron Rodgers, who has all of the accuracy and touch and arm strength and intelligence and all that kind of stuff with the mobility element added in. And I think that describes Carson Wentz as well. So I think throughout his career, Carson Wentz is probably going to end up being like consistently the QB1, QB2 that everybody takes. But at least this year, I got him at QB3. And that is kind of flip-flop with Russell Wilson. In the initial rankings, I had Wilson on top, but I'm a little bit more worried about what Wilson has around him. Defensively, I'm not entirely sure that they're going to hold up, which is going to force him into more shootouts, which, maybe it would be good game script-wise for him to get into a whole bunch of shootouts, at least production-wise, because you want your quarterback to be throwing to score for your team. But I'm really only a fan of that game script in terms of getting into shootouts every week if he's got a really good receiving core and a really good offensive line. I don't think he has either one of those. Doug Baldwin is a phenomenal receiver, but he's hurt. He's going to be out like a month with that knee injury, and that's just like the optimistic report. The Seahawks are notorious for saying somebody's going to be out for like 3 or 4 weeks, and they're out for like 6 or 7 weeks. So I don't even know if Doug Baldwin's going to be there week 1. They're confident he's going to be there in week 1, but just knowing the Seahawks, I can't say that for sure. So I'm not super enthusiastic about forcing Russell Wilson again to do everything by himself, because now he doesn't even have a defense to help him out. Now he has to basically outscore teams every single week with an injured Doug Baldwin, because at the very least, this is not going to be an issue that is 100% during the season. So he's going to be a less than 100% Doug Baldwin, Tyler Lockett as his number 2 most likely, and then who else? Probably Rashad Penny on checkdowns. Like the offensive line is better than it was last year, but I don't necessarily think it's good. I think they can run block a little bit, but I have zero confidence in them pass protection wise other than maybe Dwayne Brown. So again, theoretically, like the game script is in favor here for him to be a top 5 quarterback fantasy wise. He's going to be throwing all the time. He's got the mobility. Like there's all the elements there for him to outperform everybody else that I have ahead of him on these rankings. But just the fact that there's not a whole bunch of supporting talent around him and his best supporting talent is hurt makes me move him to number 4 instead of number 3. And there's potential that he could go lower than that. So like right now, this is the absolute ceiling that I'm taking him at, and it's in round 6. And the only reason why I haven't moved him down is just because I haven't really seen the offense play yet. But he's up this high because I think Russell Wilson is an MVP caliber quarterback. And that's pretty much the only reason. I'm not super enthusiastic about anything else about the situation. But anyway, moving on to Cam Newton, I got him as probably higher than a lot of people have him. But I feel like, again, he brings the mobility aspect, which is going to get you points. I feel like he's now that he's not in the shoeless system, hopefully they kind of take the leash off a little bit. He's allowed to kind of flex his mental muscle at the line of scrimmage. He'll be able to use DJ Moore, who is probably the best receiver on the team already, just after they drafted him. Greg Olson's healthy again. He'll be able to use Christian McCaffrey in the passing game. C.J. Anderson, I don't consider him a receiving back, but he's not terrible as a runner, just to keep the chains moving and kind of give him third and short and third and mediums to work with. So, overall, the skill position talent, I think, is very much upgraded from last year, which is encouraging for Newton. The offensive line is definitely worse from a combination of Norwell no longer being in the building and then the right tackle Darrell Williams getting hurt. So that is a major concern. But again, Newton's mobility can kind of compensate for that a little bit, kind of like Russell Wilson's and Deshaun Watson's compensates for their own respective bad offensive lines. So a bad offensive line in Carolina isn't as impactful as it would be in, say, Atlanta or New England or anything like that. So it definitely hurts, but it's not the end of the world. And I do think that with his upgrades in weapons and everybody being healthy and a new offensive system, like Newton should be way more productive. Maybe not number one overall quarterback productive like he was during his MVP season, but still probably closer to that than what we've seen in his down years. Not to mention, I feel like the Panthers are going to have to throw a little bit more this season just because, again, the run game, I don't know if it's going to be bad, but I do feel like it's going to continue being inconsistent just because of the lack of talent on the offensive line. So that might give him more opportunities to throw. Maybe they lean more on the short passing game to kind of supplement the run game and keep the chains moving, kind of like you see from like those 2011, 2012 Patriots teams where they couldn't really run the ball as well, especially in 2011, but they were able to kind of use the quick passing game as a form of the run game. So I feel like they might lean on that a little bit, which again translates to Newton production. So I've got him at QB5 right now for kind of a mix of all those reasons. He can go up or down based on what I see in the preseason and the first month of the season, but I'm pretty comfortable with him right there just because we kind of know what we're getting with Cam at this point. And similar thing right after him with Matt Stafford. Again, it's higher than most people have him, but I have him this high because of the skill position talent around him. He doesn't have the mobility of Newton to kind of give him those extra points, which is why Newton's ahead of him, but he does have a better offensive line. So I feel like those kind of balance each other out. So he'll be better protected. He'll be able to sling it. He's got a great receiving core with Jones and Tate. I think he's got a legitimate run game this year with Kerryon Johnson coming over. He's still got Theoretic as a weapon. Like this might be, in terms of overall talent, in terms of overall efficiency, the best Lions offense we've seen with Stafford there. I know that sounds weird because people think, oh, he doesn't have any guy like Megatron anymore. Like, no, he doesn't have Megatron, but he's, in terms of depth in the receiving core, in terms of familiarity with the offense, because this is his third year with Jim Bob Cooter, in terms of having a balanced attack with a legitimate run game, like this should be the best Lions offense we've seen in the Matt Stafford era, which again bumps up his value way more from where you typically see him. I'm valuing him way higher because I expect this to be overall a very good offense. And similar kind of thing to Russell Wilson, where the defense might not be great, so we could see the Lions get into more shootouts. But unlike Wilson, I feel like Stafford has better supporting talent around him to make those shootouts more productive. So you could argue, honestly, having Newton and Stafford over Wilson. We're kind of splitting hairs between them. Again, I don't want to make too many major changes until we see them actually on the field and all that kind of stuff, but I'm really high on Stafford because I feel like he's got a bunch of talent around him. I feel like game script favors him, and I feel like the Lions as a whole offense are something you can buy into this year. So that's where I've got him. And then round 7, right after Stafford, this is kind of like the sweet spot for quarterbacks this year, is Drew Brees. And Brees is a stability pick, just like Tom Brady. I can actually kind of talk about them both in the same way. Brees and Tom Brady are stability picks. Their ceilings are not nearly as high as all, at least points-wise. Their ceilings are not as high as all of the guys ahead of them, especially because they don't have the mobile element like a lot of them. Maybe game script doesn't favor them as much. Like Brees in particular, I don't expect him to get into a whole bunch of shootouts because his defense is better, his run game is better, his offensive line is better. They might be kind of a more grinded out kind of team than maybe Saints teams of the past where they were just throwing the ball all over the yard. So, he might only get like 4,400 yards. But again, it's stable. His floor is very high. He's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. So you can rely on him not to lay a whole bunch of eggs. And Tom Brady's the same way. Is his ceiling as high? No, he doesn't have the mobile element. His receiving core is not as good as, certainly not as good as Detroit, not as good as Houston, not as good as Green Bay. So he doesn't have the same caliber of weapons, but it's Tom Brady. You know what you're getting. If you just want a quarterback where you can just throw them in the lineup every week and know that they're not going to totally bomb for you, that's the kind of quarterback you're taking. I personally probably won't have either one of them on most of my rosters just because I feel like I can get maybe similar production from quarterbacks that are later in the draft. But again, I totally understand the comfort level with both of those names just because you know what you're getting and you know that at the end of the day, they're still two of the greatest quarterbacks of all time and they're not going to completely flame out on you. And kind of a similar thing to Matt Ryan where the ceiling might be a little bit higher than Brees and Brady. I do have him around lower just because he's a little bit less consistent from year to year, and have a little bit less faith in his play caller in Steve Sarkisian compared to Drew Brees and Tom Brady, who have Peyton and McDaniels. So coordinator-wise, I'm a little bit higher on those two than Matt Ryan, but it's same kind of thing. They're not mobile, but they have a history of kind of a stable floor of production. You know what you're getting, which is just a solid quarterback you can put in every single week. They're going to pop off sometimes. Like there's times when the Atlanta offense scores 40 and Ryan's going to be the beneficiary of that. And there's going to be games where he doesn't score as much. But the floor for him is higher than a lot of quarterbacks behind him. And for that, I think he has value. Again, if you just a lot of the times in fantasy football, whoever wins is just the most stable point producer. Not necessarily the highest ceiling, but just somebody who doesn't hit the low floors and completely ruin a week. So Matt Ryan's the kind of guy, if you want somebody who has a high floor, you're going to get stable points, and you kind of let the skill positions, your receivers and your running backs, do all the heavy lifting for you, points-wise. So that's why I've got him in round 8. Round 9, and a little bit riskier with Rivers and Luck. Rivers, I feel like, is a little bit safer than Luck just injury-wise, because I didn't even have Luck in my initial rankings. But now that he's throwing a lot at camp, he's going to be playing in preseason, I'm a little bit more confident in his shoulder. So I have him back up to a QB1. I think I have him at QB11 or QB12 overall. But Rivers, I have a little bit more confidence in him durability-wise, and he also has a better stable of weapons, in my opinion, than Luck. Whereas Andrew Luck, I think he's got a better offensive line. At least on paper, he's got one of the best young lines in the league, so I'm really excited to see how he does behind that. And also, he's kind of got that mobility element. I don't know if he's going to run as much as he used to, but you know he can break off a big gain with his feet if he needs to. I mean, the dude runs a 4.6, so it's not totally out of the question that he can get you some points on the ground. As far as ceilings go, Luck's ceiling is certainly much higher than Rivers. The only reason why he's this low is just durability. If his shoulder was 100% and we could be confident that it was going to be 100% throughout the whole season, I would probably have him, probably like QB 5 or 6, somewhere in like the Newton, Stafford range. Like I do think he can produce like that kind of quarterback. So we'll kind of monitor that, and he can go up or down over the next 3 weeks, just depending on what the status of that shoulder is. Whereas Rivers, he's kind of that later round QB1 you can throw in the lineup, who there are weeks that he can win them for you all by himself. He's less, or I guess he's more volatile than Ryan and Brees and Brady ahead of him, but when the Chargers offense pops, they really pop, and Rivers is going to benefit from that. He's got Keenan Allen there. Hunter Henry's gone for the year, which sucks, but in the red zone, I still think he's a guy who can produce by throwing to any number of like 5 different targets they've got. Mike Williams, I think, is going to be a big red zone target for him, so that's going to help his touchdown production. Melvin Gordon is a legitimate receiving option. So like he's got weapons. He's got plenty of weapons. And while the offensive line maybe isn't as good as Indianapolis is on paper, I do think just with the skill position talent around him and the fact that there are plenty of games where Rivers, the Chargers go as he goes, and when the Chargers have big weeks, Rivers has big weeks, and his big weeks will win you games. So again, if you have maybe more stable options week to week at running back and receiver, and you kind of want maybe a little bit more of a boom or bust quarterback to kind of win you those weeks and put you over the top, Rivers is the guy for you. Luck is the very, very, very high ceiling, high floor play. So again, it just kind of depends on where your team is at once you get to round 9, how comfortable you are with taking either one of those risks, because they are inherently riskier quarterback picks, but when they hit, they're going to hit big. Round 10 is kind of, it's the transition from QB1 to QB2 range. Kirk Cousins is probably like the last QB1 that I would really trust week to week, and I have him over Big Ben. And Big Ben, they're kind of interchangeable, Cousins and Ben, because they both are a little bit inconsistent. Ben, I feel like, is one of the most inconsistent quarterbacks in the league, if not the most inconsistent. And, I'll say it once more. Fantasy players really hate inconsistency at quarterback unless they have a whole bunch of consistency everywhere else. Like, that's like the one position where a lot of people feel like, okay, I want my weekly points that I know I'm going to get from quarterback, and I'll live and die by everything else. Whereas Ben, it's like he's throwing 500 yards and 4 touchdowns, or he's throwing 100 yards and like 2 or 3 picks. He's almost like the AJ Green of quarterbacks, where it's the peaks are high and the valleys are low. So really, he's the kind of quarterback one, or not quarterback one. I've got him QB 13. He's the quarterback 2 that you take where you really only throw him in against the really, really juicy matchups, and because in the juicy matchups he's going to get you a ton of points, but you can't necessarily trust him from week to week to be that stabilizing presence. So that's why I've got him in that range. Cousins, I've got at, again, the last of the QB1s, I've got him at QB 12 just because of the situation around him. I mean, weapons galore with Diggs and Thielen and Rudolph and Cooks, and his offensive line is surprisingly good. So the defense is a shutdown defense, so maybe the game script doesn't favor him as much shootout-wise, but just in terms of pure talent around him, I think you can rely on him from week to week to be productive. It's almost impossible to not be productive with all that talent around him. Just look at Case Keenum last year. He's definitely a better quarterback than Case Keenum. So that's why I've got him at QB1. And then after Roethlisberger, again, it's a whole bunch of high upside QB2s that you can kind of throw in, not necessarily as a streaming option, but if they get a juicy matchup, I feel comfortable throwing them in any particular week. That's Mariota, Manning, Goff, and Carr. Mariota, in particular, comes with that mobility element that we've talked about. He can break off a 20, 30-yard run at any given moment, and especially in that new LaFleur system, with all the outside zone and the boots to the backside, like there's going to be some lanes for him to run in, especially when he's booting off the backside. Because if they don't have any contain on that backside, but they kind of sink deep in their coverage to take away those deep crosses or anything that he's kind of looking to throw to off of that, he's got miles of green grass in front of him, and he's got the speed to take advantage of that. So I think he is going to get a significant boost to his overall rushing this year. I think his weapons are good. I think Corey Davis is an underrated wide receiver who is probably in line for a big breakout year this year. Obviously, Delanie Walker is one of the most underrated tight ends in the league of the last decade. So there's a lot to like on this Titans offense. I broke it down in detail, like 5-6 weeks ago, about like overall where I see this Titans offense this year, and it's a pretty high ceiling. So that's why I've kind of got him in this range, much higher than most people have him, but I do think he's a very high upside QB2. Eli Manning, same kind of thing. I mean, just weapons galore with Beckham and Ingram and Barkley and Shepard. There's very few defenses that I feel like can match up with all of those skill position players on a week-to-week basis. You could say their offensive line is holding them back a little bit, but it should be better than it was last year. They brought in a couple guys through free agency and the draft to kind of help stabilize things. I don't expect them to be good. I honestly don't even expect them to be average, but if they can be slightly below average, that's still a huge upgrade to what they were last year. So when you take all of their skill position talent into account with an upgraded offensive line, which won't be good, might not even be average, but should just be better, there's a lot to like about this offense overall. I like Pat Shurmur better as a play caller. Oh, and also game script wise, like their defense probably isn't as good as maybe some of the guys ahead of him on this list. So I guess contrasting him with Cousins, who has a similar kind of stable of weapons to the Giants. The Vikings defense is way better, so you don't expect them to get into as many shootouts because people aren't exactly going to be lighting up the Minnesota defense with any sort of regularity. Whereas with the Giants, their defense, at least against the pass, should be significantly softer. I feel like they're thinner at defensive back, they're thinner at pass rusher, like they're thinner at a whole bunch of stuff. So the Giants' pass defense should be worse, which game script-wise should lead to more shootout opportunities. And considering the upgraded offensive line and the upgraded skill position talent, there's a recipe here for Eli Manning to have a few really, really, really big weeks, and probably a higher floor than he had last year as well. So that's why I've got him again in that kind of high upside QB2 group. Jared Goff, similar kind of story to all these other guys. I mean, just tons of weapons. That's why they're high upside quarterbacks. Tons of weapons. Gurley, Cooks, Woods. They're young tight ends that they like a lot. They got a pair of young tight ends they like a lot. So just a plethora of skill position talent to throw to. Great offensive caller in Sean McVeigh. The only reason why I have him a little bit lower than Manning is just because I feel like their defense is better. So I feel like they're probably going to be blowing teams out a little bit more than getting into shootouts. At least on paper, their defense is better. With Sue and Donald, whenever Donald shows up. Their pair of corners, they got LaMarcus Joyner at safety. So, like, theoretically, their pass defense should be better. So they probably won't be passing, 35, 40 times in a game with any sort of regularity, whereas some other teams with worse defenses probably will. But, game script-wise, like, if you see him in a really juicy matchup, you can kind of throw him in there and expect to get a whole bunch of points. But really, he's the kind of quarterback you're only playing in those games where you expect a shootout or where you expect the Rams defense to struggle a little bit, because the more he throws, just with the amount of weapons he has and the play caller he has, he's going to be very productive. But the team itself is so good that he probably won't have to throw that much. So that's my main concern with him. Derek Carr, almost the opposite problem. His defense is nowhere near as good as Jared Goff, so he probably will have to throw a lot more. But I don't know really who he's throwing to. Yeah, I know he's got Amari Cooper as his number one. He's got Jordy Nelson as his number two, and Marshawn Lynch is the lead back. And I don't really know what to make of the weapons there, because Amari Cooper is way up and down, way up and down. Jordy Nelson's on the backside of his career. Marshawn Lynch is on the backside of his career. Like, if this team was, like, if this roster was from like 3 years ago, you could say, oh my God, it's going to be the best offense in the league. But I don't know. I don't know what to make of them yet. So Derek Carr can go way up or way down, just depending on what I see over the next month. But I don't know yet. I really don't know yet. So kind of keep an eye out for this one. I mean, he could even replace like Rivers or Luck in round 9 if I like what I see. But I don't know. I have no idea yet. I mean, nobody has any idea yet. I mean, I don't even know what John Gruden's offense is going to look like. It could look like something from like 1997. It's all up in the air. So that's why I can't justify him as a QB1 right now, because I have no clue what we're about to see. And then round 11 plus, I mean, these are all the QB2s where, and there's kind of different levels of it. Like Garoppolo and Trubisky are clearly like the best guys in that tier. In terms of QB2s, where you kind of feel comfortable starting them in bye weeks, or if somebody gets injured, like, it's not ideal, but it's something I could definitely live with. But really, the Tyrod Taylor and Case Keenums and Alex Smith and Pat Mahomes and Jameis Winston and Dak Prescott, like, all of those guys are the QB2s you really don't hope that you have to play outside of like the bye week for your starter. But they still need to be on your roster, because if you don't have one of them, and let's say Aaron Rodgers gets hurt again, and you have to go 6 to 8 weeks without your starting quarterback, like you got to throw somebody in there. So these are the guys that I feel most comfortable doing that. And also, if you're in a best ball league, like there's like Pat Mahomes is probably super high ceiling, so he's really good for a best ball league. Tyrod Taylor, again, super high ceiling. He's good for a best ball league, especially with the weapons he's got in Cleveland. So like there are some value to these guys, but really you just hope to never have to play them. Garoppolo and Trubisky, you could argue for the high upside QB2 label for them, but there's a little bit more unknown with them than with the guys ahead of them on the list. But maybe by the end of September, we're looking at them as legitimate QB1s. So again, if you are going to prioritize QB2, maybe if you're not super enthusiastic about the starting quarterback you have, or maybe you want somebody with a higher ceiling in a juicy matchup, those are the two guys you can prioritize. But everybody else is just, they're bench warmers, and you hope you don't touch them except for 1 week out of the year. But anyway, that about wraps it up for me here. That's at least a quick look at my second round of ranking the quarterbacks. The first round is on the Patreon. And if you want to see both these updates in document format, as well as the updates to all the other positions that I'm releasing after this weekend's slate of preseason games, you can go to my Patreon page. All patrons get access to these PPR rankings and all of these subsequent updates after each week of preseason games leading up to the regular season. There's going to be major movement in every single position. Less so with quarterbacks, but definitely with running backs and wide receivers. There's going to be a lot of big movement. Already I've got some names that are pretty substantially different than what they were before. So keep an eye out for that. If you want access, you can go to the Patreon. Any donation will get you access. Could be $10, $5, even as low as $1. Whatever your financial situation is, you can pay whatever you want. And that will get you access to this and all the updates and the patron-only Q&As and the weekly game picks throughout the season. So there's a lot of stuff on that Patreon just for patrons only. So you can click the link down in the description below. That gets you access. And I will be back tomorrow with a look at my updated tight end rankings. These are the first updates after the initial ones that anybody who's on my Patreon, you guys saw the initial ones. These are a slight update to those. Very minor update, but again, there's going to be more significant updates once we actually see these guys playing in real games. So I'll have that on this channel tomorrow, and then starting next week, I've got content coming out virtually every day until the end of August. So we've got a ton of film study coming out. We got a ton of fantasy stuff coming out. A big collaboration with my buddy Chris Harris. If you guys listen to the Harris Football Podcast and you buy his almanac, he's a great film watcher himself. So we've got a lot of collaborations and a lot of film watching content coming out throughout this month. And then I've got something very special coming out after that in a couple weeks that I think you guys have seen a little bit of me teasing on Twitter. It involves Mad Max Fury Road, one of my favorite movies of all time, mixed in with a little bit of NFL films. So stay tuned. We have a ton of stuff coming out, and I'm super excited to see what you guys think of it. So until then, later.